Hello to you and welcome to December's vlog. This month, big month, I am at last reviewing the Ineos Grenadier. I'm also taking, well, I've actually just done it, my first flight in my motor glider. If you're interested in following that story, go onto my alternative channel. The link is in the description. And of course, collecting the 2.8 troop carrier. Now, I'm a very lucky guy. I get a lot of mail from fans. Some of it, there are gems. I'm going to share one of those with you now. And also a dilemma that I have, again, whenever I build a four-wheel drive, I have a problem with selecting the right tyres. Because as far as I'm concerned, there isn't a single tyre maker on earth that actually gets this right. I'm Andrew St Pierre White, explorer, overlander and broadcaster with over 40 years driving 4x4s in association with the Overland Workshop. This is a letter received from Dr. Joy Gilberton. This was actually a couple of months back, and I've read it a few times, and I read it again this morning, and I thought I actually have to share this with you. Dr. Joy was obviously following my shows and saw me doing expeditions, camping on my own and in the wilderness, and understanding that there's a security issue. And he shares some, and let me share this with you. A tip, mate: always put out 2 chairs and a dog's water bowl, and if anybody approaches, you advise them that your mate is on the way back from walking the Doberman. And if you want to ramp it up, of course, you can then say that the dog needs to stay on the lead because it tends to be a bit aggressive. I learnt this trick from a couple of old codgers many years ago. He talks about his first, and the real history here, he talks about his first four-wheel drive being a 2A Land Rover in the 1970s. I'll get back to that in a minute. I've driven a couple of times, 2A Land Rovers. They look so beautiful in pictures. Such an emotion, kind of a motive car, you know. Drive them, that emotion, gone, instantly. I was in the Northern Territory and learnt the craft through a school of hard knocks after a couple of years, and with Landies, moved to Toyota based on their superior engineering and parts availability. I spent many years in remote areas well before the modern cons of comforts were available. I have run 5 Troopies and refused to swap to the 79 because of initially had a lot of issues around oil leaks. I didn't know about that. The starter motor in the V8, the starter motor is very, very difficult to get at, and wheel tracking which I could not countenance. Also, electronics do not fit well in the bush. And some of us old guys, we tend to be a bit locked in our ways. That's normal and healthy, and it's sometimes a little bit difficult to jump ahead. I admit it, and I received a letter not long ago from somebody, move into the 21st century, and he told me that the ideal and perfect vehicle for what I do was the Land Rover Defender. And I cannot think of a vehicle worse than the Land Rover Defender. So some of that old school stuff is really valuable, because the new school stuff, when it breaks, you can't fix it. The old school stuff, you can fix it. So that's why we tend to be a little bit reluctant in moving forward. It's seen as moving forward. And I see the new 2.8 4-cylinder troop carrier as a move forward. There's more electronics. The electronics is only in the engine. And a bit of gearbox, because it's an automatic gearbox, so there is some electronics concerned now with the gearbox. So now I'm moving out of the old manual gearbox, no electronics at all, to a Toyota automatic gearbox, some electronics. But the vehicle is still comparatively simple when compared to Land Cruiser 300 and certainly any Land Rover products. So yes, there is a move, an almost enforced move. These electronics mostly are very good. The trouble is, when they go wrong, you cannot fix them. So the question is, what is likely to go wrong? In something like a Defender, could be absolutely anything, and a tiny little sensor controlling some part of the suspension can bring the entire car to a standstill, and the only way you can fix it is to get an internet connection and a Land Rover dealer. So anything like that, I wouldn't be interested. But what part of the new Toyota could get me into a situation where you are now in big trouble because something's broken, you cannot fix it without an internet connection and a Toyota dealership? What go wrong on cars on expeditions? And that's the question. What goes wrong? I'll tell you what goes wrong. Suspensions go wrong all the time. It's unavoidable. And the more complicated the suspension, the more difficult it is to repair. And that's why we like solid axles, because it's simpler to repair. And if any part of a suspension is controlled by electronics, you will never see me driving that car on a remote expedition, because I can't. If there's a minor problem, I can't fix it, let alone a major problem. So I'm happy to move forward. On the many trips I have done with friends with Series 200s, I can match them easily, and which is good for a naturally aspirated machine without diff locks. So you've probably got a 1HZ or similar, which is a dog. It's the engine that I've got in my Africa Troopy. I want it because it's absolutely simple. There are spares everywhere, and everybody knows that engine. Here in Australia is likewise the same. Everybody knows that engine, that 1HZ engine. 6-cylinder, normally aspirated, and it's a dog. It's underpowered, quite grossly underpowered in some respects. But as a bush truck, it's fantastic because it's unbelievably reliable, and the engine itself, even the engine itself, has no electronics. Now, I'll share a short story with you, and I have shared this on my channel before, but I'll give it to you again, which is another story about the misunderstandings that can occur with modern engine when compared to old engines. It was 2010, and I was about to leave on an expedition, and which turned out to be a 66 days following, and it's on YouTube. It's following the source of the Okavango River, and I went into Angola. I firstly did a solo trip right through the Namib, across the Namib solo. That was about, if I remember correctly, 12 days. And then I met up with a group, and we went into Angola. And then when we left Angola, we then moved across the border into Botswana, and then followed the river all the way down. Just before, I had dropped my daughter off at the stables, and I remember climbing. It was my 105, my diesel 105. Put the key in the ignition and cranked it, and the crank went zhit, 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 zhit. It was healthy. My battery was healthy. The starter was healthy. It was cranking, not a peep out of the engine, just spinning with the starter motor. So what does that mean with a simple diesel engine? Now, with a modern diesel engine, it's okay. The normal things, do I have fuel? But is there a sensor that's giving the incorrect piece of information to the ECU? And if that sensor is, well, how do you find out? You can't. Or it's really difficult to find a source of a basic problem, like you've got fuel starvation. In my case, it was, what can it be? Fuel starvation. What else could it be? The engine is cranking at high speed, but there's no knock. The engine is just spinning on the electric starter motor. So it has to be fuel. It has to be fuel. These engines are so basic. What else could it be? Could it be electronic? Actually, it could be electronic. I remember managing to get it to start, and I had an inkling of what it might be. Drove it to my dealer, my local dealership. I remember I was very short on time, so they were my first port of call, and they were very friendly. This was Helderberg Toyota in Somerset West. Those of you in South Africa watching this, I think they call themselves Helderview Toyota, whatever. Mr. White, we'll be glad to help you. Just sit, not a problem. So the car then wouldn't start again. They pushed it into the workshop. Half an hour goes by. Can I see what's happening? Mr. White, it's not a problem. We're just looking for the ECU. I said, excuse me, I just want to make sure I heard that correctly. You're doing what? We're looking for the ECU. Don't worry. And I said, whoa, stop. This went on for another 10, 15 minutes. And I went into the workshop and I said to the service manager, I said, please listen to the words I say. Listen to what I say. I know what I'm talking about. You are guessing because you're looking. I know. It doesn't have an ECU. And he immediately said, Mr. White, and I said, stop it. Listen to me. That car does not have an ECU. So stop looking for it. And he was, yeah, Mr. White, again, kind of being a bit condescending, dumb client. So I phoned Gwyn and I said, Gwyn, can you do me a favour? Can you grab my toolbox and meet me at Helderberg Toyota? I need to fix it myself. And I walked into the workshop and there was a couple of guys walking around. I said, I need a lead light. You've parked in a place with very, very little light. I need a lead light. So they organised me a lead light. Gwyn arrived with my toolbox. I walked into the workshop, dived into the engine bay. Because the one piece of electronics in the 105 1AZ diesel is an immobiliser, a cursed immobiliser. And what the immobiliser does is it switches off and it's mounted on the back of the diesel pump. And it is a solenoid. And as you engage this immobiliser, it opens the solenoid and you crank and fuel passes through. And as you turn it off, electrical connection to the pump, solenoid closes, ta-da. All right? That's how the ignition works, turns it off and turns it on. But the solenoid stops fuel flow. Immobiliser. It's controlled by the immobiliser. I then tried to get, and it's really difficult to get to without taking the diesel pump off. I heard a voice behind me. Hello, are you Mr. White? Kind of got up and looked around, and there was a man standing there. He said, what are you doing? I said, you're the local Autosparky, aren't you? He went, I said, they sent you. He said, yes, they phoned me and we said, we've got a client gone berserk in our workshop. I said, what would you do if they spent an hour telling you they were looking for an ECU on this car? And he just smiled and shook his head. Said, it's a dealer. What did you expect? I said, okay. And I told him the symptoms. I said, fuel, right? He said, yeah. I said, immobiliser? He said, probably. He said, do you know of them break on these cars? He said, it's very unusual, but it's not impossible. I know of one that's gone years and years ago, one that failed. I said, do you know how to get this out? He said, do you want me to bypass it? And I said, just get rid of it. Took him, 15 minutes, and he bypassed it. And my car was running again. And I had faultless, my trip with that vehicle was absolutely wonderful. I had another electronic fault actually on the car, but wasn't part of the Toyota. It was a Gemini split charge battery system that I had tested and I wasn't sure was working terribly well. And it was on that trip that it actually finally failed, and I actually thought, okay, well, it is. I suspected that it wasn't working properly, and that it wasn't. And my second battery wasn't getting a full charge. It wasn't getting, and it turned out it wasn't getting any charge at all. Again, because of voltage drops. So it had a massive voltage drop. I sorted that out with some cables, and I would just unplug it at night. And that was my sum total of my vehicle problems on that trip. Actually, that's not true. I lost a air conditioning belt as well in Shakawi. I remember fixing that. But anyway, it was a hard trip, very hard on the car, and the cars were fantastic. Dr. Joy mentioned something else. I want to. This was the reason why I actually wanted to tell this story. He said, I can match them easy, talking about his 1HZ Land Cruiser. I also insist on 16-inch tyres, and the science is in. The fats do not do as well as the pizza cutters, even though it defies logic. Any long-term four-wheeler can tell you that, just based on experience. So, it doesn't defy logic at all. There is no perfect tyre available now for my Troopy, my previous Troopy, any of my Africa Troopy, my 2-point. There is no perfect tyre. The perfect tyre does not exist because tyre makers don't understand this. They know how to make tyres. Modern tyre makers are making tyres that are so much stronger, unbelievably stronger, than they were 20 years ago. I would do trips and expect 2 to 3 punctures, and probably the probability of a complete tyre failure was, probably 50%, that I would have a tyre failure which would render that tyre, would destroy it. This pattern of fitting dual wheel carriers kind of set in. You need two spare wheels. To go expedition overlanding, you need 2 spare wheels. No, you don't. The expeditions I've done in Australia have been extreme in terms of canning stock route. It's not extremely hard on tyres. It's hard on tyres, but not extreme. And I didn't have a single flat. I was using on my first canning was a BFG KM2 all-terrains on a 235 85, which are a little narrow. They're pizza cutters, but they're also 32 inch. They're actually 31.7 inch diameter. So that diameter is a little low. And I find that those narrow tires actually, their weakness is actually on tar. They don't perform well on tar at speed. Off-road, fantastic. So even a fairly small wheel and a fairly narrow tire. That's the same tyre size as we had on the Range Rover on our 2022 canning trip. We had Falcons. I have Falcons on my current troop carrier, the grey one. They're 265/75s, so again a 31.7 inch, which is not big enough. It's not quite big enough. So I now go big enough, which is a 33 inch, which is the tyre diameter you want for troop carriers. And I think so many of you will agree with me. For the kind of vehicles we drive, 33 inches is optimum. 35 for off-road, yes, would be nicer, but you lose a lot on-road. They cost a lot to run because they're expensive on fuel. They use more fuel. The steering tends to be heavier, and the general feel of the car isn't as good. You want a Troopy to perform like it's supposed to, like the people in the factory designed it to do, you put in the tyre size that they engineered the car around, which is a 33 inch narrow tyre. So the tyres that are supplied with it are of such low quality that and they have poor grip, especially on tar. They underperform on tar. So if you do a lot of getting to the destination on tar, day after day after day, on tar at 100, 110, they perform badly, and when it rains, they perform very badly. So we upgrade our tyres, a more robust tyre, a stronger tyre. So what do? We go mud terrains. Mud terrains, noisy. And stronger, yes, but noisy. So the best tyre makes, in my book, again, don't make the tyre that I want. I now, with the new Troopy, must go, I want to go 33s. 33 is the right diameter, but I have to go too wide, and it becomes heavy. The steering becomes heavy. They're not as good off-road. Now, some of you will say, oh, but what about sand? What about sand? And I've said this before, and I'll say it again. What about sand? You need wide tyres and sand. No, you do not. You do not need wide tyres and sand. Get it out of your head. You are wrong. That is a misnomer, and it is fundamentally incorrect. Yes, because a wide tyre, when I let it down, bulges. Again, you are fundamentally incorrect. The additional flotation, in other words, the reduction in rolling resistance by lowering the tyre, is caused by the lengthening of the tread, not the additional width. The additional width counts for nothing in the equation, almost nothing. It's the width that people assume is because they see these fat tyres and they think, I need a fat tyre. But it's not the width, because what a fat tyre does, as a wide tyre moves through soft ground, particularly sand, okay, it builds a wall in front of it. It actually builds up a wall and then pushes the wall. So the higher the wall, the higher the rolling resistance, until you can't overcome this resistance and the car will not move, and it bogs down. If you can prevent it sinking, then the wall built up in the front of the tyre gets low. So imagine if you can stop it sinking and narrow the width of that wall. How do you do that? You reduce the tyre pressure so it doesn't sink, and you narrow the tyre so it's not as wide. The higher the profile the tyre, so the moment you go 17-inch, you're reducing your profile, you're reducing the effect of the length of the tread on the ground, lengthens, and the moment you reduce the sidewall height ratio, i.e. put a 17-inch per rim, put an 18-inch rim, and so on, what you're then doing is you're reducing the height of the sidewall, which you are reducing the ratio of the length of the footprint, which means you are increasing the rolling resistance on soft ground. So what is the ideal tyre? Well, if you want to just drive on sand and you're going to spend your entire life on sand, don't go 16-inch, go 15-inch. Go for a tyre size that gives you the biggest possible aspect ratio, the highest possible aspect ratio that you can find, as narrow as you can find. And that's the problem. As narrow as you can find. Nobody makes a 255 85 R16 all-terrain tyre. And when I talk about all-terrain, I'm not talking about the incredibly heavy-duty tread that are noisy, heavy on fuel, poor performance in the wet, kind of performance you get out of all mud terrain tyres. All of them. And I'm running now these Falcon mud terrains. They're 265/75s. The width is about perfect, but they're not. The diameter isn't. So I'm getting a little bit of advantage because I'm not too wide, but I'm losing even more advantage by not having a big enough diameter. Tyre makers, if a tyre maker had to bring and here's the criteria, you want to build a tyre for the 4x4 enthusiast, they'll go, wow, I'm getting great fuel economy because I don't have all that rubber rubbing on the road. I'm getting great off-road performance because I've got that 33-inch. I'm getting marvelous handling and feel because it's not too wide. I'm getting sensational performance because I'm getting all the advantages of a narrow tyre with all of the advantages of a large diameter tyre, without having to deal with the noise and heavy fuel consumption and poor wet road performance of a mud terrain tyre. And to clarify, you want an all-terrain tyre with a 3-ply sidewall. Such a product does not exist anywhere in the world. There are some that come fairly close, but none of them hit the mark. The very fact that an all-terrain tyre exists is because tyre manufacturers are saying, We need something that lies between the 4x4 enthusiast that wants off-road performance and somebody that wants on-road performance as well. Well, I'm suggesting that that tyre size and that configuration would be the ultimate all-terrain tyre, because it's not a mud terrain. You will get very good performance on-road, but because of its size and configuration, you will get outstanding off-road performance. And as soon as people start actually using it and going, wow, this is unbelievably good, so much better than those good-looking but horrible wide tyres I had on before, you will be a market leader. So that's my message to tyre makers. Yeah, I know why you're making wide tyres, because the entire world thinks that if you want to go off-road, you need wide tyres. And I've done the all-terrains, I've done the mud terrains, I've done these different sizes. You know what I'm having to settle with? 285s, 285/75s, because I want 33 inches, and I have to deal with the extra width. It's a compromise. It's a massive compromise. So what do? Compromise on size, 265/75. Compromise on width, 285/75. The other part about this build is that it's now 7 years since I moved with my family to Australia. Those of you who don't know, I'm actually English born. I spent 38 years living in South Africa, where I met Gwyn. My children were born in South Africa. We moved a short period to the UK, a little under 2 years, and moved to Australia in November 2016. And we still consider it one of the best decisions we ever made. I love this place. I love living here. Perth is a lovely, lovely place to live. I can hardly fault it. And the four-wheel drive industry welcomed me with such open arms that I want to in some way pay back. So my trip carrier is going to be an Australian build. I am going to use Australian products. So like my Africa build is largely African products, or certainly available in South Africa, made there where possible and practical. Likewise, my troop carrier, my 2.8, will be made from accessories made in Australia. And I would also like to celebrate the Australian four-wheel drive industry, in that many of the products that I am fitting to the car are owned and made by smallish family businesses in Australia. And there's so much great kit in this country, not just from the big players, from the small players too. So that's my project. Hope you've enjoyed this morning's little vlog. See you next time.